I'll never forget the day Karen Thompson knocked on my door with a clipboard in hand, a smug smile plastered across her face, and a power trip in her eyes. "You're in violation of the HOA rules," she said, as though she were the judge, jury, and executioner all rolled into one. And what was my terrible crime, you ask? I was watering my lawn. Yep, watering my lawn. If you think that sounds absurd, it gets worse. That's just how it all started. I've lived in Pinewood Hills for over 5 years, and to say it was a peaceful, quiet neighborhood would be an understatement. We all knew each other's names, waved when we saw one another, and kept to ourselves for the most part. It was the kind of place you could leave your garage door open without worrying about your neighbors judging you. That is, until Karen Thompson became president of the HOA. Karen wasn't always the way she is now. I don't know what changed once she assumed her role, but something did. She went from being an ordinary neighbor with a slightly controlling personality to someone who acted like she owned the entire neighborhood. I first noticed the shift when she started sending out helpful reminders about keeping our lawns pristine and our mailboxes perfectly aligned. At first, I thought it was a bit overboard, but nothing too crazy. Everyone had a few minor complaints about her, but she was polite enough, so we all tolerated it. I mean, it wasn't hurting anyone, right? Then came her latest suggestion about lawn maintenance. It was subtle at first. Just a notice about trimming bushes by a certain time, maybe pressure washing your driveway every few months to keep up appearances. It was all so innocuous that I shrugged it off. But it didn't stay innocuous for long. Soon, the rules started to get more specific and absurd. First, there was a notice about how to properly position your garden gnomes. Yes, garden gnomes. And then a directive about flower arrangements. Apparently, there was a proper color palette for flowers that we had to follow. That's when I had my first real run-in with Karen. It was a typical Sunday afternoon, and I was in the backyard tending to my garden. I'm not one for wild displays of color or anything. I prefer subtlety, pinks, whites, soft yellows. Nothing too flashy. My garden was a place for me to relax and enjoy some peace, but that peace was about to be shattered. I heard a knock on the back gate. Odd, I thought. No one ever comes back here unless they've been invited. When I opened the gate, there she was, Karen, staring at me like a hawk, clipboard in hand. My heart sank as I knew something bad was coming. "Hi, Karen, what's up?" I said, trying to sound polite despite the irritation creeping up inside me. "Excuse me," she began, her voice dripping with that special Karen kind of authority, "but I need to talk to you about these flowers." "Flowers?" I was taken aback. "What's wrong with my flowers?" "They're too much," Karen said, waving her clipboard in a dismissive motion. "It's chaos. This neighborhood is about uniformity. And your flowers, well, they're an eyesore." I blinked, unsure if I had heard her correctly. "An eyesore? They're just flowers, Karen. What's wrong with them?" "They're too colorful. There's no balance, no organization. Look at these reds and oranges. How are we supposed to maintain order when someone's front yard looks like the circus came to town?" she snapped, her voice rising with every word. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I stared at her, dumbfounded. "So, you want me to get rid of my flowers?" "I'm not saying you should get rid of them," Karen replied, tapping her pen against the clipboard. "But maybe consider replanting them in a more appropriate color palette. I'll be monitoring this, of course. We can't let this kind of wild display become the new normal around here." I stood there, stunned into silence. Appropriate color palette? This was getting out of hand, but Karen wasn't done. "I'll be keeping an eye on this, and I expect a change within the week," she said, like she had any right to dictate what I planted in my own yard. "If you don't comply, I'll have no choice but to issue a fine. Rules are rules, Mr. Harrison." "Fine," I muttered, taking the notice from her. "I'll think about it." "I expect you to make the changes within the week," she repeated, her voice like a drill sergeant. She turned on her heel and walked away, leaving me standing there, my hands still in the dirt, my mind spinning. Over the next few days, I became hyper-aware of everything I did in my yard, what flowers I planted, where I placed them, how much I watered them, and whether or not they looked too bright in Karen's eyes. I was paranoid, checking the rules every time I stepped outside. Every time I heard someone's footsteps, I looked up, half expecting Karen to be lurking behind a hedge clipboard ready, waiting to catch me in another act of defiance. And sure enough, it wasn't long before the next surprise arrived. A letter from Karen herself. This letter wasn't just about my flowers, though. No, Karen had sent out a full-on manifesto to the entire neighborhood, detailing the proper way to maintain one's yard, including a very specific color palette for flowers, approved lawn decorations, and even acceptable garden gnome placement. Karen's HOA reign was becoming more than just a nuisance. It was taking over every corner of our lives. But it didn't end there. No, Karen's obsession with rules and order didn't stop with flowers and fences. It spread to everything in the neighborhood, and she began to turn her attention to things that, frankly, didn't matter at all. When I had a small BBQ one evening, inviting a few friends over to hang out and relax, Karen came storming up to my front door like the Grim Reaper, clipboard in hand. "Is this a social event, Mr. Harrison?" she asked, her voice clipped and sharp, her eyes scanning my front yard. "Because I noticed that your guests are parked on the street, and that's a violation of HOA parking regulations. It's causing a traffic hazard." I looked at the two cars parked on the street, hardly blocking anything. "Karen, there's nothing wrong with parking on the street. It's not like they're blocking anyone. Rules are rules, and the rules are clear," she said, her tone dismissive, as if she were speaking to a misbehaving child. "If you can't keep things in line, I'll have to issue a fine." A fine for parking on the street. I couldn't believe it. "Karen, seriously? It's just one afternoon. It's not hurting anyone." She crossed her arms, looking more smug than ever. "I don't make exceptions. Not for anyone." At that moment, I'd had enough. "You know, Karen, it's one thing to follow rules, but it's another thing to ruin people's lives over trivial nonsense. My guests are here for a couple of hours, and you're acting like it's the end of the world." She didn't flinch. "Maybe if you respected the rules a little more, we wouldn't have to have these conversations." I gritted my teeth. "Maybe if you didn't treat everyone like criminals, this neighborhood would actually be pleasant to live in." It was clear that Karen was beyond reason. Her obsession with control, her inability to let anyone live without her constant scrutiny, was suffocating. It wasn't long after that exchange that I started to look for a new place to live. I couldn't do it anymore. I wasn't the only one either. The entire neighborhood was starting to feel the strain. People stopped having gatherings, BBQs, and even casual hangouts. No one dared risk upsetting Karen, and slowly but surely, Pinewood Hills began to lose its charm. The smiles we once exchanged were replaced by furtive glances, and the friendly waves turned into nervous nods of recognition. No one was happy anymore, not with Karen in charge. I kept hoping that someone would step up and challenge her. I was sure I wasn't the only one who felt this way. But no one ever did. Karen's influence grew, and it didn't stop at flowers and parking. She started fining people for not keeping their windowsills tidy enough, for leaving tools in their garages overnight, for having a lawn chair on the front porch. If there was a rule, Karen would find it, and if there wasn't a rule, she'd make one up. Eventually, I found a new place, a little out of the way, but away from Karen and her ever-watchful eye. I packed up, put my house on the market, and left Pinewood Hills behind. But the damage Karen had done wasn't just to my lawn or my peace of mind, it was to the whole community. It was like she had drained all the life out of the place, turning it into a cold, oppressive shadow of what it used to be. I'll never forget that feeling. The suffocating control of someone who believes their idea of perfection is the only one that matters. But I won't be her victim anymore. Not in my new neighborhood. Here, I can water my lawn in peace, plant my flowers without fear of judgment, and live my life without constantly wondering when Karen is going to show up to issue her next ridiculous rule. And for the first time in years, I can finally breathe.